Security experts say Taliban's recapture of Kabul in Afghanistan could potentially pose a major security threat in Southeast Asia, as it may embolden homegrown extremist groups in this region. In February, the Philippines Anti-Terrorism Council declared 10 individuals as terrorists with links to 3 major extremist groups in southern Philippines. Experts say the porous alliance among rebel groups in the south makes for an elusive peace in the region.
A place in much need of development. In 2019, a referendum was held to ratify the law that sought to establish the political entity known as the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao, or BARM. The vote is a political solution to decades of fighting between the Philippines and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, or MILF, over land and religion. Many regard Mindanao as their ancestral homeland. Thousands have died and millions forced from their homes.
This Muslim-majority region in southern Philippines is named after the Moros, or the Muslim natives of this area. They have long suffered historical injustices from colonizers, Christian settlers, and even from the Philippine military. Sources of conflict are varied here, and the poorest provinces of the Philippines are also here. Greater autonomy is meant to empower this long-neglected segment of the Philippines, where some 80% are Catholics.
After decades of conflict, MILF is now transitioning to politics. An interim government composed mostly of MILF leaders now presides over BARM. It covers Mindanao's Muslim-majority areas as it transitions to its first elections as an autonomous region. But years into the transition process, recurring clashes and security woes continue to hound parts of the conflict-ridden region, like this clash early this year.
This area where we are has since been cleared by government troops, but as you can see behind me, houses lined up are either partially or fully destroyed. This area was the site of intense gunfight between soldiers and the Bangsamoro Islamic Freedom Fighters, separatist rebels the Philippine government considers as terrorists.
Mindanao has witnessed a huge amount of violence in recent years between the army, separatists, and other extremist rebel groups, one of which is Abu Sayyaf, that's known for high-profile kidnappings and beheadings. There's also another group, Dawla Islamiyah, whose members include the remnants of the Maute group, which took over key parts of Marawi City in 2017. Both groups have pledged allegiance with the so-called Islamic State, or IS. The BIFF is a splinter group of the MILF which opposes the peace deal. It has since broken into factions, with one splinter group swearing allegiance to IS. Many BIFF members are blood relatives with MILF members, providing the interim government an opportunity for negotiations. Are back-channel dialogues effective in terms of dealing with lawless armed groups in southern Philippines?
For some of the splinter groups, for instance, BIFF, they've now been divided into several factions. And some of the factions of the BIFF, we do have an ongoing negotiations with them. The approach is still to win them back, go back to the mainstream MILF, and then proceed with the decommissioning process. There are, of course, some groups that are really aligned with ISIS. We do not negotiate with them.
But analysts question this strategy.
Remember, the BIFF and the MILF are bound together by very deep kinship ties. Commanders are cousins or brothers of each other. But the point is, they shouldn't be speaking in behalf of these groups. Diba? They're the ones presenting them as this, they're that. No? Let them speak for themselves. Let them disavow violence, extremist violence.
In the quest to crack down on various terror groups, the consequence is militarization and recurring clashes, and civilians bear the brunt of it.
As the Muslim-majority Bangsamoro region transitions to autonomy to reverse decades-long injustice against the Moros or Muslim natives here in southern Philippines, the lion's share of development is not expected to go to communities like here where we are, that terrorize a non-Moro ethnic group, or in fact, a minority of minorities, in this case suffering violent attacks from lawless elements and caught in the crossfire as government troops pursue these violent groups.
In this Tedray community, 3 tribal members disappeared in March this year. Their bodies found and their relatives do not know who killed them. No terror groups made claims for the killings. This means they could be victims of either private armies or extremists or even collateral damage in government operations. Conflict could sometimes mean perpetrators of violence against civilians are never identified. Mindanao's sources of conflict are not limited to extremist groups. Private armies abound, many operated by local politicians. Clan wars among the powerful have been a staple. Experts believe the rehabilitation of battle-torn Marawi, known as the Islamic City of the Philippines, and the return of those displaced is crucial to lasting peace.
The recruitment rhetoric is that they destroyed our religious center. And they destroyed it because they are anti-Islam, which is of course not the case at all.
One key development that may help stamp out radicalism in the region is the provision of jobs, so people who are fighting can raise a family and have a life that gives them stability. Things that align with the Bangsamoro people's hope for a lasting peace.
This excavation is where members of the terror group Bangsamoro Islamic Freedom Fighters stayed during an intense gunfight with soldiers some 4 to 5 years ago. In fact, those 4 trees serve as a shield for a high-ranking commander of the group. He has since surrendered, laid down his arms, brought with him 14 other rebels to surrender, and lives his civilian life in that hut behind me.
Haji Alibuddin Malang is known as Commander Malang among the Bangsamoro Islamic Freedom Fighters, or BIFF. That's one of several rebel groups in southern Philippines. Commander Malang is a Moro. They are Muslim natives from the country's south. Many of them have felt marginalized. This is a strong rhetoric tapped by rebels and extremist groups through the years. Feeling powerless, at the tender age of 15, Commander Malang joined the Muslim independence movement. The organization was fighting for an independent Muslim state from the Philippines.
Ang ginagawa ko, dahil sa takot ko sa sundalo, nagsama na ako doon sa mga tao na nagtatago bilang black shirt. Kaya dumami ang lumalaban sa gobyerno. Dahil sa takot, hindi yan nirecruit. Basta sa takot ng mga Muslim na lalaki, pag nabalitaan nila, halimbawa, nandyan yung sundalo.
But radicalism grows in different ways in southern Philippines. For Commander Malang's son, he simply followed the lead of his father, who would later join the Islamic State-linked BIFF. It was Commander Malang's wife who persuaded both father and son to surrender to the authorities.
Pidaw ko tiguliw karon ka matuwa ko na mati tatig ko siya sa logan. Pidaw ko sa kan tiguliw karon ka matuwa taron tigo mati ta siya sa bakwitan, siya sa mga logan na di ta makuli sa dagapata.
The deep enmity between the Philippine military and Muslim natives in southern Philippines appears to show signs of fading.
were on board a patrol vehicle of a joint peacekeeping force comprised of police, military, and former rebels of the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, or MILF, which has secured a peace deal with the Philippine government and whose leaders now occupy key posts in the interim government as the region transitions to autonomy.
Tenex Makalimpas is an MILF fighter who's now part of this joint force. He will be among the last batch of MILF fighters to lay down their arms as part of the peace process.
Okay na talaga ngayon, ma'am. Kumbaga, yung sugat na napakasakit noon, ma-update, ngayon okay na talaga. Dahil nung nagkasalamuhan na kami, alam namin na hindi pala totoo masama ang mga EFE. Napakabait nila. So ngayon, ang gusto namin, may sulong namin ng kapayapaan dito sa Mindanao. Matagal na po ito talaga na gusto namin ng kapayapaan. Dahil sa pag-aaral ng mga bata, gusto namin ma-continue. Tapos yung paghanap buhay ng tao, gusto namin ma-normalize para maganda yung pamumuhay dito sa amin area, sa Mindanao.
An interim government for the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao, or BARM, is helping to establish a regional parliament in exchange for the decommissioning of firearms. Part of the challenge is gaining the confidence of communities.
I think it will take time for soldiers to gain the confidence and the sympathy of our people. It's natural because we've been in war for several decades already. So the trust would have to be earned. Part of the strategy to earn the trust is for people to show that the MILF combatants, soldiers, policemen can actually work together.
A key component of the peace process is also providing a better life for former rebels. The so-called normalization process involves the laying down of arms of MILF fighters in batches. In exchange, they will receive a socio-economic package to help them return to civilian life. After the last batch of rebels, an exit agreement will be signed. This former MILF fighter was among the first batch who surrendered. He says he has not yet received the full benefits promised to him. He joined the Muslim rebellion in his youth after many of his cousins were killed in war with government troops.
Pag walang mangyari exit agreement, assuming itong peace talk, itong nag-back down, bilang Moro, bali, mawawala yun. Kasi nga, nananay tayo sa dugo namin yung pagkabag sa Moro. Talagang babalik kami. Kaya nga, kasi niloko eh. So, hindi na namin isipin yung na-decommission kami, doon sa pangluloko sa amin, pag Moro ka. Hindi matter doon yung pera. Basta yung usapan. Kunyari, meron lang hindi nasunod, hindi nag-exit agreement, nagkagera. Sa amin, walang choice, babalik kami sa kung ano yung dating ganun yun.
For many Moro fighters, whether from the MILF or other radical groups, they were born into conflict. The violence has left Mindanao one of the poorest regions in the Philippines.
Ang epekto dito, yung kabuhayan, yung kabuhayan nasisira. Wala kang concentrate sa kabuhayan. Kung sa lugar ay maraming karahasan, gira, ganun. Pati mga kaari-arian dyan, nasisira. Yung farmer, hindi makapagtrabaho ng maganda. Epekto yan. Siguro, pag nakita ng mga dating kasamaan ko, nakita nila na sinusuportahan ako ng gobyerno, hindi nila ako pinabayaan, sigurado po yan mag-challenge lahat ng mga yan na magbalik na sila sa gobyerno.
Other agreements with the government in the past have failed. But many here are clinging on to the fragile hope for embracing peace in the Mindanao region.
About an hour and a half away from Medan City in North Sumatra province lies an Islamic boarding school like no other. Rows of sugarcane trees flank the path to Al-Hidayah Islamic Boarding School in Deli Serdang Regency, a school established to de-radicalize the children of terrorists, founded by former terrorist Khairul Ghazali. Mr. Ghazali, or Buya, which means father as he's fondly called here, is an unassuming man, and so it could surprise many to know that his involvement in terror activities started as young as 18 years old, when he came into contact with Abdullah Sungkar, the founding figure of Al-Qaeda-linked extremist group Jemaah Islamiyah, who nurtured him along with Abu Bakar Bashir in Malaysia. He says he was struck by the thought of starting the school in prison.
Ketika kita ditahan oleh pihak aparat karena aksi-aksi yang kita lakukan.
Bapak sendiri ditahan kenapa aksi yang mana?
Ya, kejadian pengumpulan dana melalui perampokan bank CIMB, kemudian penyerangan Polsek Hamparan Perak, dan pelatihan militer di Jangto tahun 2009. Saya ditahan tahun 2010.
Berapa lama?
Sekitar divonis 6 tahun dan saya menjalannya 4 tahun 2 bulan. Nah, di dalam tahanan itu saya menyaksikan sendiri anak saya itu jadi putus sekolah.
Fully operational in 2016, the Al-Hidayah Islamic Boarding School was a place to rehabilitate children of terrorists and separate them from the crimes of their parents like him. Mr. Ghazali wanted a place where children could not only feel safe and be taken care of, but where they could be de-radicalized so they wouldn't feel the need to avenge their fathers, who had been killed, arrested, or were being tried in court. While students at the school are taught the national curriculum, they're also taught a specifically created de-radicalization program.
Itu kita menerangkan tentang Islam itu adalah rahmat lil alamin. Islam itu tidak marah, tidak emosi, tidak dendam. Jadi apa yang dilakukan oleh orang tua kamu itu adalah suatu jihad yang salah pemahamannya. Kenapa? Karena tidak ada digambarkan dan dibuktikan dalam sejarah Rasulullah melakukan jihad yang seperti itu, yang merusak, membunuh, menghancurkan. Jihad itu justru membangun. Jihad itu justru menghidupkan, bukan mematikan. Ini kita jelaskan.
Students are also made to engage in trauma healing activities.
The students here are taught to be independent. They're given life skills such as raising livestock and farming. They grow corn, chili, and this field that I'm standing in is growing cassava.
One student who told me he enjoyed the activities is 15-year-old Ansori. His father was involved in several attacks on the police in Medan City, as well as paramilitary training in Janto, Aceh province, and he was subsequently arrested. Ansori spent 3 years at the boarding school, which he credits with helping him come out of his shell.
Apakah membuat Anda lebih nyaman atau merasa maksudnya saya nggak sendiri?
Ya, ada sih. Saya merasa nyaman sih. Bukan macam saya aja yang seperti ini gitu, karena ada orang-orang juga, teman-teman saya seperti saya juga.
Today, the school also hosts children from regular families, an effort that was met with resistance from residents in the vicinity of the school initially, but was bolstered once the school received support from not just local authorities, but Indonesia's National Counter-Terrorism Agency as well. The agency just last year pledged continued partnership with the Islamic boarding school. To this day, the Al-Hidayah Islamic Boarding School remains the only boarding school in Indonesia for children from radical and terrorism-related backgrounds. Amid the ongoing pandemic in Indonesia, however, majority of the students have been sent home, with the exception of those residing in the surrounding areas of the school that come for lessons during the day. The rest of the children have been conducting their studies online. Aside from health concerns, COVID-19 has renewed terror threats. According to Indonesia's National Counter-Terrorism Agency, radical groups have actively carried out their actions through recruitment propaganda, both online and offline during the pandemic. Martinus Hukom, head of the National Police's Special Anti-Terror Squad, Densus 88, in a focus group discussion said that radical groups have been exploiting the pandemic and using it as a trigger point to motivate members.
Contohnya mereka mengangkat bahwa pandemi ini adalah merupakan semacam nubuatan bahwa ini akhir zaman. Lalu masyarakat atau jamaahnya ini harus menyiapkan diri untuk menyambut adanya akhir zaman itu. Lalu kita lihat ada persiapan membuat bom.
Since last year, over 300 suspected terrorists have been arrested. But this hasn't deterred radical groups from continuing to use social media to influence, motivate, and spread propaganda, which is why officials have said it's important for people, especially the youth, to be aware of self-radicalization through social media. Another matter officials are closely monitoring is the developments in Afghanistan. If the situation worsens, there are concerns that Afghanistan could become an epicenter for foreign terrorist fighters.
Ketika situasi memburuk, lalu terjadi perang saudara di sana seperti yang terjadi di Syria, kemungkinan besar Afghanistan menjadi epicentrum baru para FTF untuk berangkat ke sana, lalu mereka bertempur di sana, di samping bertempur mereka melatih diri, lalu kemudian balik ke sini.
Officials and terrorism experts both agreed that the Taliban's takeover of Kabul could motivate extremist groups in the country to want to do the same. And measures that officials are implementing to keep abreast of the situation include law enforcement within a criminal justice system, detaining suspected terrorists preemptively, and de-radicalization efforts, which include re-education and reintegration. Back at the school, Mr. Ghazali has one more building he wants to show us, a gallery of peace. Like the school, the gallery is the only one of its kind in Indonesia.
Inside, the space is filled with banners and posters broken down into 3 parts: the incident and those involved, their ideology, and points to counter that ideology. Now, the gallery also has exhibits like this laptop that belonged to Nurdin M. Top.
Police killed the Malaysian-born militant in 2009. He was the suspected mastermind of Jakarta's JW Marriott and Ritz-Carlton hotel bombings. With funds worth some $28,000 sponsored by the North Sumatra Provincial Police to build it, Mr. Ghazali hopes that the gallery will teach future generations about the dangers of terrorism and radicalism. Currently, about 30% of the school's students come from terror-related backgrounds, but Mr. Ghazali is hopeful that more students can be accommodated and de-radicalized in the future.